God damn it.
I want the truth. You can't handle the truth. Ain't the truth? No, set you free.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Face the Truth. This one is going to be awesome. I'm really excited. I've been, a fan of Sam's since I was a young lad. Very much a huge inspiration of why I am the artist I am today, and we'll talk about that. Besides being an awesome artist that influenced me when I was quite young, he also was the art director of Mad Magazine, which is another huge part of my life and career. Something that meant so much to me as a kid and helped me grow and become an artist, actually. So this is really awesome to be able to talk with Sam. He's one of the best art directors I've ever worked with. He's a great guy. He's hilarious, not just his looks. So everyone, please welcome Mr. Sam Viviano.
Hello.
So thank you so much for doing this. This is really awesome. And right off the bat, I just want to just say, like, it's really, I was thinking about this earlier. I have this book here. I've had this book since I was like 10, maybe.
Bob Stack's book. Yeah.
And this is how I started to be introduced to a lot of different caricature artists. Of course, you're in there, and you've got this, one thing that I would, when I was a kid, I started doing caricature. I thought I invented caricature when I first started doing it. Like I didn't know, I couldn't pronounce it obviously, but I just started drawing people this way. I was obsessed with drawing. I drew everything you can think of. And eventually I just started getting obsessed with drawing people. And I started, everybody, I would just draw like these caricatures. And I thought I was a genius. Like I came up with this thing, And then my dad bought me Len Redmond's book on caricature. I think it was just called the Art of Caricature or something like that. And I was like, oh man, this is a thing, And then soon around that time, I was like 10, I think. I started getting into Mad Magazine, and I mean that just changed everything for me. Like every time I would go to Green Bay to visit my grandma, she'd have a new Mad Magazine for me, and I would sit at the kitchen table and I would just draw every page, or just draw everything. Of course, there was your work. There was like Mort Drucker, Jack Davis. And then I started getting old issues with Norman Mingo and all that, I just became obsessed with, Mad. And I remember one time my mom or my grandma even got me a couple issues of Cracked. And I was like, that's not the same thing. But it's so interesting because I remember looking back and when I see drawings of yours from back then, it's so weird how it just pulls me back, like into my childhood so much. I remember specifically too, like there was one issue, like I love the Ninja Turtle cover you did because I was obsessed with the Ninja Turtles. But there would be, how much Mad influenced me would be like, I remember this one cover was like a Star Wars issue, and I can't remember the artist. It might've been Richard Williams that did the cover.
Is this the one with Darth Vader taking off the helmet and it's Mr. T?
No, this is more like it was. I can't remember. I remember it was a spoof, I think, of one of the older posters or something like that. It might have even been the back of the magazine. Mm-hmm. But I remember even back then, I was like, one day I have to teach myself how to draw and paint so I can do that. So I can be in. I mean, it was like that young where I was like making goals, like I'm going to be in Mad Magazine. I got to do that. And so this is a long intro for you, but I just wanted to explain this because I think it's kind of cool to like, full circle here. But basically, as I started progressing with my career, I started getting work in a bunch of different magazines, some pretty big magazines. But all I wanted was Mad Magazine. That's all I cared about. And it's kind of funny because like serious people in the industry would, like even my agent, I would just say, hey, I just want Mad. And they're like, dude, you got time, you got this and this. I'm like, I don't care. I want Mad. That's what I want. And so I can't remember the exact year. I think it was around 2007 or 2008. I had made a few trips a couple years in a row to New York. And every time you were so nice, you invite me into the office. And I got to see the Mad offices, and you took me around. And every single time I was like, maybe this is the time. Maybe this is the time where, Sam's going to ask me to do something. And it was always awesome. And you'd show me things, and you would give me great compliments about my work. And then you would also tell me, you got to start working on some of this other things. And, you would give me some advice, and then you'd shuffle me on my way. And I'd just be like, oh man. And I always was telling people, like, Sam Viviano at Mad just like flirts with me. He's teasing me. It's like I can't take it anymore. And then I remember the time, I think it was 2008 when you called me for my first job. And
Okay.
it's one of those things where it's hard to express how that felt. But when I got that first job, you were real calm, and you're like, so we got this job for you. I think you're perfect for this job. And you told me, a lot of artists, they make the mistake right away if they want to try all of a sudden to change their style so that it looks more Mad-like. And you were like, don't do that. We like you. We chose you because we like your work. So just be you. And I remember when I got off the phone, and I couldn't believe I was starting to do sketches and studies. And it was like the best thing ever. And I know this sounds crazy, but it's like when you lose your virginity for the first time. It was that good for me.
Thank you.
It was that good. So, but I did cry both times afterwards. So,
I've made a lot of people cry that way.
Yeah. But anyways, long intro, but I just wanted to say like how much it's one of those things where I look back and, Mad and working with you, I got to work with you a few more times throughout the years, but it was always, people do think it's crazy. They're like, why are you so excited? It's Mad Magazine. It's like, cause it's Mad Magazine. Like it's that, it's just, it's the one of the most fun I've ever had working on a job. So anyway, thank you so much for that opportunity. And, and for the few the tours I got at the offices before they shut down and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah. Well,
I feel like I got to see it. So
it's interesting because that attitude is not just yours. I mean, we discovered over the years that there are lots of people who had Mad kind of on their bucket list.
Yeah.
Which is a problem for us because even though it wasn't quite the way it was in the old days where there were only 12 artists who worked for Mad and they were in every single issue. And literally when I first went to Mad in 1976, I was told it's a closed shop.
Yeah.
So by the time I came around on staff, it was no longer a closed shop. However, there's still this idea that we're a big family.
Mm-hmm.
And to have somebody come in, and this is not you, I'm just talking about others that, I want to work for Mad. And it's sort of like a checklist. And once they'd done it, they weren't interested anymore. And that was not really our goal. Our goal was make you part of the family so that when the next appropriate job came up, I'm calling you up and there's no dance anymore.
Yep.
Now we're on a different kind of footing because you're part of the tribe. That's how it worked with you. That's how it's worked with plenty of people. But if you go through, you'll see there are a number of examples that stand out of people who did one or maybe two jobs for Mad, and it just didn't work out, for whatever reason. They didn't mesh with us as a family. Sometimes it's not usually that they're not good artists. It's more that chemical thing, chemistry.
Yeah. I mean, with that first job I did for you, I was so nervous because I remember, I think it was Tom Richmond. before I got that job, like years before, he was like telling me like, hey, if you want to work for Mad, you should work on these kind of things. And because he knew that's what I really wanted to do. And then he said, just to let you know, you probably, whenever you get something for them for the first time, it's probably going to be a small little thing like in the intro or something. And it's going to be like a test to see how you handle it and how you go with it. And that, that really could determine if you ever work for them again, kind of a thing. So I was always like, whenever that call comes in, I got to nail it. And then when you contacted me, it was for a 2-page full spread, full color with all these like 6 characters or 8, whatever. Yeah. And I was just like, whoa. And I was, yeah. But it was exciting. And it was just like, for me, it was like graduating from some kind of, getting my first like real gig after graduating, from a college. Like I got my first, like all the other stuff I did didn't really matter. Like it was that important and exciting, but it's funny because I think what it is, and I'm pretty sure like you can relate because you started doing cartooning and caricaturing like when you were way younger, but yeah. Like there's the thing where you grow up with it and you kind of learn from it and it becomes, like for me, Mad was that was the epitome of like, if you're doing caricature type art, that's like the because it was just full of caricature and yeah. Cartooning and illustration. So it was like, there wasn't like, except for, that other magazine, there wasn't really any other magazines out there. So like, and for me, I collected as many as possible. Just like, I would collect the different covers and I would study them. I would learn from them. And so it was, it's different, it's like, even right now, I mean, I finally got a cover for Mad, but it was like the new California Burbank version. But still, I was so excited to get it. But it's the only piece of my art that I have hanging in my studio is my cover for Mad. Like, because that's like I don't have like Time covers hanging in my studio. It's Mad. So
you're like Howard Stern. Yeah. Howard Stern was more proud of being on the cover of Mad than he was being on the cover of Time.
Yeah, it's just it's one of those things that I think it kind of feels like full circle, Mm. I remember when I started drawing from your drawings, and I remember the one thing I could pick out your work immediately, because you always, you have the jaws and you have a very specific way of drawing eyes. And it was interesting. Like, and it used to drive me nuts because I was trying to figure out how to draw and caricature at the time. But you have a weird way of where every single one of your drawings, it almost looks like the same person, but it looks like the person it's supposed to be at the same time. Like, you have so much style that like I remember looking at one recently with Leonardo DiCaprio as a Titanic piece, and all the characters look like the characters, but they all have that signature, like, I don't know, it's hard to explain. You had such a specific approach or style. I don't know if that even makes sense, but like it's almost like well, in this book I just showed you a little bit ago, right? You actually say something about the jaws, which kind of blew my mind, because you said the reason you draw the jaws like that is because you see you want to see the person from not just straight on, but they have other sides to their face at the same time. So you're trying to capture almost like this 3-dimensional view. So like, and it's true, because when you look at someone from one angle, their features can be, they can look deceivingly different than when you turn the other. So you're trying to almost capture a 3-dimensional view.
Right.
And it's just interesting, because when I look through your work and I see that, it's like you were doing something so different, I think, than any of those other artists. And that really was something that I tried to figure out when I was a kid, even. And it was confusing, because I used to copy your drawings and try to figure it out. The jaw thing.
Did you ever figure it out?
Well, I decided that, because, for me, I thought, okay, well, that's how he's doing that. And he's getting good likenesses. maybe that's how you do it. And it didn't really work for me.
Yeah.
I just developed my own way, but
Right.
it was one of those things where I was like, there's something going on there that,
But I think actually that's in some ways the key to learning how to draw, not just caricatures, but in general, because we all start out being influenced one way or another by other artists.
mm-hmm.
And some people start out copying other artists, which is fine, with the goal of figuring out why do they draw like that.
Yeah.
But the goal shouldn't be to draw like them, but to understand why they draw like that. How does that person see? And ultimately to learn, I see differently, so I will draw what I see. I taught at the School of Visual Arts for all of the 80s, essentially. And I always caution my students that I don't want you learning to draw the way I draw. I don't want your drawings to look like copies of my drawings. I want you to learn how to see through your own eyes and then figure out what it means to you so you can render it. And that's not easily learned all the time, because people sometimes are caught up with the idea of style.
Yeah.
And I got to do this kind of style, that, or, because they see a Jack Davis style, they copy a Jack Davis style. And yet they don't realize that Jack Davis's style was inextricably tied up with who Jack Davis was.
Yeah.
How Jack Davis saw. So the idea is ultimately to learn how you draw. And it takes different people, different periods of time to learn that.
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, it was the same thing with Mort Drucker. Like I would try to draw like him for a while and try to figure it out. And but I think ultimately, like everyone, as far as style goes, I think it really does come down to how much time you are in the studio working, how many drawings you're doing, how many, because you can't like just decide on a style. It doesn't really work that way.
But some people do, and that's
but it doesn't. I don't think it's very successful. There's someone that, like I actually talked with SVA yesterday with a class, and we were talking about illustration and how like James Jean comes out with just incredible work for years. He's just taking over everything. Like he's everywhere, and his work is, he doesn't do the same thing twice, and everything he does is just masterful. But he's got a specific look and style, and then all of a sudden you see the life of illustration change, where everyone's trying to be James Jean,
right?
But none of them can even do close to what he's doing. But they come up with their own kind of generic Cracked Magazine version of it.
Yeah, well, and that's the problem, is that when a certain style takes over, it becomes eventually generic, and to me less interesting.
Yeah.
The interesting thing, bring up Davis again. Davis was sort of the model for all of us, because he did so much work over such a broad spectrum of things, magazines, comic books, trading cards, record albums, movie posters. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And sometimes Davis drew, quote, seriously, and yet it was still unmistakably Jack Davis, and still had that undercurrent of Davis humor. If you look at the early EC comics he did, war comics and sci-fi and horror, it's still Jack Davis. And that's the thing that always amazed me, is that the personality of the person, the artist, came through no matter what he did, what media he was working in. And that was in some sense always my goal, is not that I was creating a persona, but that I wasn't worried about it, that I knew who I was would come out of my artwork if I wasn't strenuously trying to emulate somebody else. And in fact, early in my career, because the kind of work I did kind of fell into the same ballpark as Davis and Drucker, basically pen and ink and watercolor.
Yeah.
same ballpark. They're at home plate. I'm somewhere way out in the bleachers. But it always upset me when people would somehow lump me in as a Davis
Oh yeah.
or Drucker imitator, because I didn't.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even known how. The only way I could have ever imitated him was I was deliberately trying to do a Drucker-esque or a Davis, but that would get boring to me after a while, because it's too much of a problem-solving event and not truly artistic, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, for sure.
So it did come to a point where, once again, this is early in my career, so we're talking about the late 70s, where people would call me up and say, well, we want a Jack Davis kind of drawing. And I'd say, look, I mean, it took me a while to figure this out, and that this was how I had to approach this, was say, if you hire me, I'll give you the very best Sam Viviano I can give you. But if you really want Jack Davis, you got to spring for Jack Davis.
Yeah. Don't make me try to be Jack Davis.
Yeah. Because I won't give you a good Jack Davis. I'll give you a half-assed approximation. You know?
Yeah, that's true. That is, I mean, it's interesting, because from my perspective on the outside looking in on this, is like your style was so like specifically like unique. I thought I could pick it out right away. Just like I could see Jack Davis and, oh, that's Jack Davis. So I never saw it at all like that. But I can see how people that don't know what they're doing would.
Yeah. I would say artists tend to be able to do that. I mean, when I was a kid, I could tell the difference between all the artists in Mad and beyond, actually. But I've talked with John Ficarra, who's my editor at Mad for so many years, and he could do the same thing with the writers. He could recognize the writers' styles without having to look at the credits, because that's where his mind is at.
Yeah. That makes sense. Man, it to this day, I still get really annoyed. There's so many, like Jack Davis was so like unique. Like you can easily, see us, he stands out from everybody, basically. Very unique style. But there's so many artists today that I see still trying to do Jack Davis feet.
Yeah.
And that's one of those things that drives me crazy. I'm like, dude, no, it's almost blasphemous.
Well,
like, just stop. Do your own feet.
That's the thing, is because Davis drew that because that, as I said, that's how he saw feet. Now, he had the embellishments like the holes on the bottom of the soles and stuff. Yeah. That also came from observation, as well as his own intrinsic sense of humor. But if you take that and you are copying the way he elongates the feet and the holes in the bottom, it's secondhand news. Yeah. It's not firsthand observation. And that's where the failure is, because you have to ask yourself, what do I see? And that's why, with the big jaws, maybe in Bob Stack's book, I gave an explanation for it, which sounds, a little bit like I was trying to come up with an explanation, as opposed to that's how I see. It is the sort of thing where I'm trying to get the physicality, the three-dimensionality of the structure of the face, but in a certain way, that is how I see it. And I wouldn't expect another artist to see it. And if I see somebody doing that a lot, my concern is they're trying to see through my eyes.
Yeah.
And it's doomed to some kind of failure. I mean, somebody might be successful doing it, but ultimately the work is not real. It's not personal. Oh yeah.
No, I totally understand. Like that's the thing, is like when I was a kid trying to learn how to draw, like that's like I would buy Spider-Man magazines and just draw every page. Like I was, I would mimic the style as close as I could.
Spider-Man and Romita.
I can't remember the name of the artist, but there's, of course, Batman and all that kind of stuff. But your actual quote was, I give my people these huge jaws. I'm not just drawing what I see from a front view. I'm incorporating a side view as well. I distort what I see in my head.
Well, it sounds good.
Yeah. No, but I remember like that. I was just like, oh, that's so interesting. Like that little sentence, like had me thinking like, wow. And I probably did so many messed up drawings because of that, because I was trying to figure out what does that mean? You're trying to
Well,
draw all the sides at the same time. But like, I get it now. But when I was a kid, I remember just thinking like literally it kind of challenged me, to like try to think that way a little bit.
well, listening to the quote, what I think is the key for me, the kernel of that is what I see. Those three words.
Yeah.
I think I've always really tried hard to create volumetric, solid caricatures, and I especially when I was teaching, I learned that people tend, particularly when drawing from photographs, everything flattens out because they're drawing a two-dimensional image. And that's one of the reasons that I always try to have as many source materials as possible. And I remember the old days, I'd sit at my drawing board, I'd have more than a half a dozen different photographs sitting under my left hand while I'm drawing with my right, because I wanted to know, what does that nose look like, not just from the front, but from the side, from a 3/4 view.
Yeah.
And if you draw, too many people when they draw from photographs, particularly when starting out, they tend to draw a caricature of the photo.
Yeah. Yep.
And not of the person.
Yeah.
And that's a problem.
Yeah. No, that's something that takes a while. I often, one of the things I've taught with my students is that like reference, sometimes an artist fails before they even get started because of the reference they've chosen.
Right.
And I always try to think like, close your eyes for a minute and think about Kanye West or Tom Cruise or whoever it is. And what do you see?
Right.
Because that's what you need to capture. Because there you see something already. And if you don't capture that, you're kind of missing, the character and the feeling a little bit. But it's yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's funny. You see that every once in a while, especially on Facebook. There's like 1 billion caricature artists on Facebook now. Yeah, sure. And at least on my feed, because I have a lot of friends and they're all into caricature. So almost everything I see on good days, when it's not political crap, I see tons of caricature work. And every once in a while, it's like you see one and you can tell right away. It's like, hey, I know this guy is a great artist. He does a lot of good work, but he just missed this one. Mm-hmm. And it's always that it's probably a terrible reference that he chose and based it on,
Right. Well, I mean, there are different reasons why we miss, and I think everybody does. I mean, the mistake is to think, listen, and I saw this.
You don't miss Sam.
Oh, I do. But I mean, listen, I don't know anyone who holds Mort Drucker up in higher regard than I do.
Yeah.
But I saw plenty of times that if he didn't miss entirely, he was still struggling. And sometimes it's just, you can't, particularly if you're trying to draw the person, sometimes you can't bore into the person. You can't quite figure out who the person is. An example in general, this is not Mort's problem, but a number of caricaturists will have problems doing caricatures of pretty women. I mean, it's an odd category because they don't know what to caricature, And part of that problem, once again, is they're too hung up in the idea that caricature is exaggeration, which in their minds means making bigger. Yeah. When sometimes exaggeration can be making smaller. Mm-hmm. But in the case of, okay, here's a young woman. What's my goal? Is it to exaggerate those individual features, or is it to capture the character of the person? And if the first thing I think is she's a young woman, then that's my main goal, is to emphasize the young and the female part. Yeah. And a lot of caricatures will get so hung up on the details, of cheekbones and noses and lips, that it's full of real hard angles and abrupt transitions. And you may get a likeness, but it makes that young woman look very hard and angular, when what you really wanted, or you should have wanted, was to make her soft and youthful.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
a lot of it, what you said about you teaching, I thought was great. Close your eyes. What do you see when you think of somebody? Another approach to that is, when you first see someone, what's your first response?
Yep.
You know, like I don't know if you saw The Queen's Gambit, the movie about the young woman chess master.
Yeah.
You know, I remember the very first time I saw her is her eyes are on the side of her face.
Yeah. Yep.
Now, I have not drawn her, but if I did,
yeah,
my goal would be somehow not to lose sight of that.
Yep.
And yet still,
yeah,
to make sure that I captured the fact that she was young and feminine.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it really gets hard.
That's the trick. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the key thing that you said too, is I'm a strong believer in that as well, is because I learned a lot from a few things you told me, things that Ishmael Roldan told me, a couple artists that when I was first, kind of figure out how to get into the illustration. And when I first started, when I first started in caricature, I think I started like I was around 10 or so. And for me, it was all about exaggeration and pushing things as far as possible. And one of the things you told me early on was, hey, you do really nice work and they're drawn well and you're rendering well and everything, but it's like we wouldn't really, this is not really our thing, because it's so far. It's like making such a statement, like what is the statement here? And we need, and so you kind of opened my eyes up a little bit. And Ishmael Roldan told me one of the same things. He said, hey, if you want to start getting published, hold back that exaggeration a little bit, because you want to be able to it's more about communicating the story and the essence and the feeling of a person, not like just exploiting every little curve and different thing that you're noticing. And as soon as I accepted that, I started getting work. My style, it's like, and you know what's funny about it? I realized, I'm like, oh my gosh, this way of drawing is so natural for me.
Mm-hmm.
What was I doing? I was like I was pushing so extreme, because I thought that's what it was. And one of the things I like to try to explain to when I have done like talks about this kind of stuff is, I now think of exaggeration as just a tool. Like caricature is one thing, exaggeration is a little part of it. It's like a pizza.
Right.
Like exaggeration is like the sauce on a pizza. You can have a pizza, but if the sauce is like ketchup or something, it's a terrible pizza. You have to have the right amount. And if you have too much of good sauce, it could be too much. And it's all about having that perfect pizza.
The whole idea of like the extreme exaggeration is in a sense, part of the problem is that there have been very, very good artists who have been able to get away with it because they were as good as they were. And this goes way back. I mean, in some ways, you might be able to push it back to David Levine in the 50s, but I became very aware of it in the 70s with a group of French caricaturists who went by the group name Les Grands Gouels. Patrice Mouchouan and Jean Moulatier and Ricord. I can't remember his first name. Moulatier, his work was fantastic.
Yeah.
And these guys were all extremely influenced by Mort Drucker, believe it or not.
Yeah.
Mort Drucker, whose exaggeration has always been gentle.
Mm-hmm.
But they were influenced by him, but then they went beyond and they started pushing further and further and further.
Yep.
And I can't help but believe they had an influence on Sebastian Kruger in Germany. And he set the standard, I think, for exaggerating everything. And yet he never loses sight of the person underneath.
Yep.
which is the problem with so many people who have emulated Kruger, that they lose the forest for the trees. They're exaggerating everything so that eventually you don't know who the person is.
Mm-hmm.
But he was very good at it. And Optibeck has been good at it.
Yeah.
But once again, it comes back to what I said before: is if all you're doing is emulating another artist's shtick,
Yeah.
rather than saying, "What do I see?" It's an intellectual exercise and loses the humanity that I think has to be at the basis of all caricature.
Yeah. No, exactly. I think it's really it's amazing because I almost can like look back and realize when I started becoming Jason Seiler with my work.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's like a moment where I had studied so many of these artists that you've just mentioned, and I basically closed all the books and put them all away and just started drawing how I, like, because Jan Beek was also a huge influence, his cross hatching and how he would exaggerate. So I took little elements from different things that I just figured out, and I just started drawing freely, just like this, like just draw, just draw. And like it's like that. I can't remember who came up with the saying, but my dad would tell me all the time, especially when I started learning how to paint, he would tell me, you're going to expect to do at least 500 bad paintings before you end up doing a good one.
Sure.
Which is kind of discouraging, but at the same time, it's true, because you really, I always feel like in order to succeed, you must struggle a little bit. The struggle is something that you have to get through and get by. And that's how you learn. That's how you get better. That's how you develop a style and everything else. But, it doesn't come without its wounds or its ups and downs. And it's just it's a journey that everyone has to take. But it is interesting looking back, because I mean, I feel like, for me personally, I feel like I'm connected to so many of the artists before me. Like I have no problem, sharing what artists influenced in what way. Like, I've like learned brushwork from Roberto Prada. I would see some of his paintings and I'm like, oh, I love how I can see how he's sculpting the shape like this. And I start borrowing that. I'm like, and then I worked.
Roberto started out imitating Chris Payne.
Yeah. It does. It's like a connection, and Chris Payne was, he's one of those, like my studio when I was getting started looked like a serial killer lair. I just had like magazine pages ripped out everywhere and with little Post-it notes and little notes pointing to someone's hands saying, those are good hands, learn how to draw hands like that, or, whatever. And I was self-taught. So I would see, like, I remember I had a page of CF Payne's, I think it was from an Entertainment Weekly, but it was Steven Spielberg as Indiana Jones running away from the rolling, rock behind him. And I had that in my studio forever. I was like, how did he do that? Like, how is he rendering this way? And how is he? And, of course, I did not understand his technique. I was using acrylics, and I was trying so hard to emulate the style by using acrylics, trying to figure it out. But all of that is important, because it really ultimately it develops you into becoming something with your, it's all a part of, what it takes. Like, what are some of your early influences when you were getting started?
Well, I was thinking about when you're talking about yours, and I mean, the fact is that we all stand on the shoulders of those who preceded us.
Mm-hmm.
We can't do it at all without having some vague sense of the language, and the language is taught to us by those who have used it.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, certainly you can point to Davis and Drucker, although I don't know that I ever consciously thought of them as my direct influences. And the odd thing for me is that it ranges in so broadly in areas that you'd never even think, how did he influence you? How did she influence you? It started out when I was a kid with my dad, I mean, I know your dad's an artist as well. My dad never worked professionally, but he always had a studio in our house. And he had done these sketchbooks, when he was a teenager, early 20s. So this is back in the late 30s, early 40s. And he wrote and drew these stories about, an adventurer going to Africa, or big city crime reporter. And I would look at these books over and over and over again, because there's something magical, particularly because this is the original art. This is not seeing it in print.
Yeah.
The odd thing about stuff in print, I've mentioned this to a number of people recently, is that you don't even think of them as real people having created that. You look at the funny papers, and there's a bunch of comic strips, and there's, Peanuts by Schultz, and there's in my day, it was Buzz Sawyer by Roy Crane, and Lil Abner by Al Capp. And these names were, you might as well have said Jupiter and Mercury and Minerva, because they were gods. Same as in Mad, Drucker and Davis and Jaffe and Woodbridge and Berg, and all those guys were gods, not human beings who worked out of their apartments, struggling to meet a deadline and making a few bucks to raise a family.
Yeah.
So, and like you, I was kind of omnivorous. I love magazines. I mean, to me, and it's still true, there's something about the printed page, the bound volume. I loved holding them, turning
the smell
page,
of it.
Smelling it. Yes,
Yeah.
Absolutely. So it wasn't just comic books or cartoons or Mad. When there was a point where, when people would ask me who my favorite artist was, expecting me to say Mort Drucker or Jack Davis, I would say Joe Bowler. You familiar with Joe Bowler?
Not sure.
Bowler was an illustrator. So basically, just the fact that somebody could draw these or paint these beautiful, luscious, wistful, and it wasn't just the medium, it was the thought processes, it was the mood that was alien to me, and that therefore much more fascinating than something like Drucker or Davis. But going back to influence, I mentioned my dad. Early influences, Popeye. When I was 3 years old, the Popeye cartoons that the Fleischers did were released to television, and I watched them religiously every day. Now, I don't know how much of Popeye shows up in my work, but it's definitely an important part of my development. From Popeye, you go into the Disney cartoons, eventually comic books. An extremely important influence on me over the years, my early years, was Carmine Infantino, who, when I was a kid, drew The Flash, and then later in 1964 took over drawing Batman. And there was something about his work that, and I think a lot of it had to do with he was a very good designer of a comic book page. And I was just fascinated by his work. But the problem is you can go on and on and on, and I'll just name names as they come to me. Ronald Searle, Pat Oliphant, Michelangelo, Bruegel. Oh boy, I'm blanking his name, so I'll mix it. I'll leave it. There was a time I was very big into books on editorial cartoonists, Hugh Haney and Paul Conrad. I mentioned Searle, the people who kind of were influenced by Searle, Gerald Scarfe, Ralph Steadman. There was a point where I just kept buying Steadman books and Searle books. And I don't know that you can directly see any influence at all in my work, but it's got to have some kind of because of all of the time I spent into looking at their stuff.
That's interesting.
Mary Cassatt, Degas, Picasso, for Pete's sake.
Yeah.
Picasso is a great caricaturist.
Oh yeah, he was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny.
Rembrandt. I forgot Rembrandt.
Rembrandt. Yeah, I was gonna say like for me, like all the different things that I've mentioned earlier were obviously huge influences on me when I was younger and developing. But once I got to the point where I was actually working as an illustrator and becoming more of a painter and understanding that sort of thing, my influences are all fine art, basically, like painters, Sargent and Zorn and Scott Burdick, and I mean, there's just so many painters out there that I mean, that's what I think about mostly now. It's like just the painting aspects of it. But I wanted to know, I was curious because obviously you worked for MAD for years, and then I think around what was it, like 98 or so, something like that, you became the art director for MAD.
Beginning in 99.
Okay. I was wondering, like, obviously you were involved enough where you were working with, you, like you said, it's like a family, like a group of artists but how does it go from you working for them to, hey, you want to run this thing as far as the art directing goes? Like, you want, because that seems like I mean, I'm sure you had things that worked up to that, like where you were giving certain responsibilities before it.
Well, no.
They just threw you into it.
It came as a complete surprise. Although I guess in retrospect, maybe it shouldn't have. I started contributing to MAD as an illustrator at the very end of 1980. My first job was in December of 1980. It was the cover of MAD 223, J.R. Ewing, yada, yada, yada. I didn't get another MAD job for 4 years because I don't think that Al Feldstein, the editor, felt all that comfortable with me for whatever reasons. And he never gave me another job. He retired, and Nick Meglin and John Ficarra took over, and then they gave me another shot. That was in 1984. And then little by little, I started becoming, let's say, a regular contributor to MAD. So now you're talking about, after that, a 15-year period in which I'm doing a lot of different things for MAD. I'm doing movie and TV parodies. I'm doing covers. I'm doing back covers. I'm doing the standard MAD, you're a blank blank when kind of article where there's a dozen gags on a 2-page spread. And it even got to a point where, that's my pup, Wallaby, just barked. It even got to a point where whenever they had a problem, they didn't really know who could do a particular kind of job, they would call on me because I became a kind of troubleshooting problem solver. In that respect, I sort of followed in the footsteps of Bob Clark, who had done a lot of that sort of thing prior to my being involved, and concurrently as well until he retired. So things got to be, there was a little bit of turmoil at MAD in the mid 90s because 1992, Bill Gaines, the founding publisher, passed away. And he didn't really leave any plans for what would happen when he passed away. And DC Comics, which like MAD was part of the Time Warner corporate empire, came in and said, well, MAD started as a comic book. It's sort of a comic book. We think we're the best to take over. And there was really no competition in that. So starting late in 1992, DC Comics took over publishing. At that time, Jeanette Kahn was the president and editor-in-chief, and Paul Levitz was the publisher. So eventually they decided that MAD needed a makeover. It needed to be brought up to date, maybe a little edgier. I don't know what what their plans. I was not on staff, so I was a freelancer, an interested onlooker, but still not inside. And they had a redesign that didn't really last all that long. They also they kind of put to pasture Len Brenner, who had been on the Mad staff for like 48 years or something at that point. He had been the production manager and then the art director for a long, long time. But they felt that given the times, mid-90s, that they needed to bring in somebody with digital smarts. And so they did. They brought in a new art director. Lenny became a consultant. And it just didn't work out. He was art director, the new guy, for about 3 years, and then he and Mad parted ways. So now Nick Meglin and John Ficarra had to find a new art director, and apparently they were given a mandate from above to get a big name. And they interviewed a lot of people, and none of them really seemed to fit the bill. And one day I was sitting in John's office, John Ficarra, after having delivered a job. And I said, remember, John, about 5 years ago, you offered me a kind of in-house bullpen job? Because that was early on in the computer era. They thought I knew something about computers because I tinkered with some jobs that used Illustrator or Photoshop. And I turned him down at that point because I said, I'm really concentrating on my freelance career. And if I come in, I can't serve both masters. And they even tried to tailor it. They said, well, how about if you work 3 days and you have 2 to 5 days a week to work on your freelance? And I thought, you know what, even that wouldn't be fair, because I'd get a big job and I'd start calling in sick because I'd have to meet the other. It's just not fair to you. So I turned him down. And I said, you remember when you did that, John, 5 years ago? And he said, yeah. I said, well, it's too bad you didn't offer me that job now, because I'd probably have a different answer for you now that I have a 4-year-old daughter at home. Yeah. And I'm more interested in things like a regular paycheck, like benefits, vacation, weekends.
Yeah.
And I was just talking idly, because even though I knew he was looking for an art director, it had never crossed my mind in any way that I would be a candidate for an art director job. To me, art directors were primarily designers. Now, there had been a few examples in the past where illustrators had become art directors of magazines. Milton Glaser certainly comes to mind, but he was also a designer. Paul Davis had art directed some magazines. But that was not what I had any interest in. So I was just talking idly. But I didn't see the light bulb go up over his head. And the next day he called me up and said, how'd you like to be art director? And I said, what? Are you kidding me? Are you serious? He said, yeah. I said, you really think I would be more valuable to you in that position than I would as an illustrator? He said, yeah. I said, well, listen, I got to think about this. I got to talk it over with my wife. He said, yeah, take your time. Let me know tomorrow. And I did. I talked it over with my wife, Diane, and she was not very positive about it. She didn't want me to do it. And I said, why not? She said, I want you to be happy. And she didn't think I could be happy in an office setting, working with other people, being somebody's, having somebody as a boss and being someone else's boss.
Yeah.
And it's true. It's a big difference. On the other hand, I was 45 years old, and I had been doing what I had been doing for half my life. I'd been a freelance illustrator for 22 years, and I was, maybe having a midlife crisis. I was trying to figure out how to bring more pizzazz to what I was doing. And I was trying a few different things and trying to figure out how I could get out of what maybe I was thinking was a kind of rut. And this offered at least a chance to try something not slightly different, but really different.
Yeah.
And because, as far as I was concerned, it was a job for which I had no training, no experience, and no qualifications for. But Nick and John saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And so I said, okay, look, let's give it a year. If at the end of the year I'm not happy, I go back to freelancing. Well, as you know, I had that job for 19 years, so it must have worked out to some extent.
Yeah.
I can't entirely speak for why they offered it to me, other than, as I said, I'd already shown myself to be something of a problem solver, which is very important in that job. I had tinkered with computer. My first computer was the very first Macintosh in 1984. And I experimented with it and evolved with it as the machinery and the software evolved. So I was a dilettante, but they thought I knew a lot more about computers than I did. I learned an awful lot on the job, believe me.
Yeah. Quark Express and all that back then.
Yeah, they're using Quark Express, and I mean, there are even programs that don't exist now that were very important back in those
Zip
days.
drives.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, they were still using floppies in those days. So one of the hurdles I had was, in my mind then and now, is that I'm an illustrator, I'm a cartoonist, I make pictures. I am not a designer. I know how to compose a picture. I can design a page if you hold a gun to my head, but it's not something I am particularly skilled at. So my first goal was to hire people who were much better than I was. And that was sort of my leading goal as art director, was to acknowledge my own, not only my own skills, but my own limitations, to hire people, both on staff and freelance illustrators, who are much better at the jobs than I could ever be, and to make sure that I always gave them the credit for it. I saw people when I was working there, not so much at MAD, because MAD was too small a staff, but we were part of DC Comics, sort of, and I would look over there and I saw people whose focus in their job was to go up the corporate ladder, to get a promotion, to get a raise, to get a new title. And they felt that the way to do that was to take credit for everything good, whether they had done it or not, and to shift the blame to someone else for anything that didn't go well. I said, I can't do that. If we get a good design on an article, I want people to know that it's Ryan Flanders who designed it, or Nadina Simon, or Patty Dwyer, or Doug Thompson. I don't want to say, I put this whole magazine together, because I felt that it made me look good that someone I hired was as good as they were.
Yeah.
What's the downside? So, and once again, the same in terms of art. We expanded the ranks of artists at MAD immensely, not only when I was there, but even before, so that it was no longer that closed shop of 12 artists. When I was art director, I think we must have had well over 100 artists that we considered part of the family. Now, not everybody was in every issue. That'd be impossible.
Yeah.
But it became the sort of thing as who's the right guy or the right gal for this article, that, and some of it is style, some of it is thought processes, some of it's personal chemistry, some of it is that intangible thing of saying, okay, this article I can entrust to this person because I don't know what they're going to do, but I know it's going to be good. And that means that you develop trust with a smaller group, but then you do your best always to say, okay, look, here's an article that nobody in the smaller group is right for. So who in the larger group, or who that we haven't used, is somebody who would bring something special to this? That's how you got your first job. It was a 2-page spread with, I guess, 8 caricatures. And I said, I want somebody not only who can do caricatures, but I want a painterly feel to this, and that's when you came in. There would be plenty of articles that I think you wouldn't be right for at all.
Yeah.
But then there's articles that say, well, Tom Bunk is perfect for this, or God, I'm trying to think of other people. The names start floating out of my head as soon as I try to think of them. Covers. There was a period where we doing kind of a round robin with covers with like a sizable number of artists, and it would be, is Roberto Parada the best artist for this cover, or Chris Payne, or Mark Fredrickson, or Mark Stutzman, or Richard Williams. Eventually, as you probably are aware, we ended up with Mark Fredrickson as our regular cover artist because we felt that we needed to keep a kind of more consistent look to the covers at some point. And Mark checked a lot of boxes for us, not just for me personally, but for the editorial staff, for the rest of the art department. And that's another aspect, by the way, is you were told that early on to tone it down. You said I said that to you, and that Rodan said that to you. And sometimes it's a matter of the venue. What's right for Mad may not be right for Time.
Exactly. Yeah.
What's right for the New Yorker is not necessarily right for Vanity Fair. So even though Mad has a pretty broad range, and always has, of art styles, ranging from the very polished realism of a Mark Fredrickson, or the painterly qualities of a Norman Mingo, going to the really broad cartooning of a Don Martin or Don Edwing.
Yeah.
It's still a matter of what's appropriate for this particular use, whether it's a cover or a movie parody or a different kind of article. And sometimes it would be hard to justify a certain kind of exaggerated caricature because, as you kind of pointed out, that exaggeration would get in the way of what we were trying to do with the given article or parody or ad.
Yeah, you don't want it to be a distraction.
Exactly. So, I mean, you did a job for us where we actually asked you to be very rigorously on model with the source material, the Terminator TV show.
Oh man, yeah, that one was killer.
It was killer, but it came out great. It was a terrific job.
Thank you.
But we did put the thumb screws on you for that.
Oh yeah, that one was, man, I remember just like the details in that one. I was like, oh my gosh, because I was trying to get it as accurate as possible to the,
Right.
But what was fun about something like that is it's that's when you got to put away the caricature aspect. Like for me, my focus on that job was I'm spoofing it's like an episode on Saturday Night Live or something. Like I'm spoofing this poster, and it has to, in order for it to have the impact, it has to really feel like that original poster.
Right. That's exactly the case. That sometimes you have to be able to do the satire with a totally straight face. And in fact, that the reader has to be fooled that this is the real thing.
Yeah.
And before they realize, wait a second, what's wrong with this picture?
Yeah.
There's another artist that I mentioned his name a little earlier, Mark Stutzman.
Yeah.
Mark is not a humorous illustrator per se. He's a terrific illustrator, but his stuff is a combination of realistic and stylized. But we used him a fair amount because he always understood the purposes to which we put his art. So he understood that idea of doing something with a straight face that would be funny because of that.
Yeah.
Now that's the exact opposite of someone like Tom Bunk, whose work is just so mind-blowingly bizarre that you enter into it trying to figure out, what's the entry point into this bizarre mind of his. So
for sure.
Once again, there's stuff that Tom would not be in any way right for.
Yeah.
But there's stuff that only he could do.
Yeah, that's interesting. And this is part of the reason too why I said in my intro that you're one of the best art directors I've worked with, because I've worked with so many art directors now where, a lot of art directors, they, I guess what I gotta say is like, maybe I could list on one hand the best art directors I've worked with. Because most seem to like, just do whatever when but like there's like you actually understand the art. You understand, like, you actually had direction. You actually had something to say. I actually learned things when I worked with you.
Wow.
Like you could give me little pointers, or you would say, hey, maybe try to, just like, it was like subtle little things, like try this or that. I'm like, oh, okay, that's really cool. Okay. But like, I really appreciated that. And I think that's what was like a no-brainer of why you ended up becoming the art director. So, I mean, obviously they had to have seen that, I often feel like, like I've always, I don't know if I love doing the work I do, but I've often thought, would I be able to be an art director? Because I've worked with so many publications now where I'm like, I would do it way differently. You know what I mean? Like, and I want there to be a little bit more direction with things. And, but it seems like you have to completely change your whole mindset. And so that must've been a little bit strange for you to like go from being a freelance illustrator to all of a sudden now you're thrown into that. But you did do illustration every once in a while for Mad still. Like you still got to do a few pieces, but you kind of answered a little bit of the question, but I was curious, like how you choose who's going to do what. You did kind of answer that, but what I was thinking of, and what I was wondering was, like, when you guys are about to start, when you were about to start an issue, what's the first thing that happens? Because it just seems like such a huge amount of, you've got the writing, and you've got the, obviously you got to figure out the designers and who's going to lay out what and all this stuff. But because when you guys would send me work, it was already way thought out. Like I got like, the writing, the layout, everything was already, I just had to do the artwork for you guys.
Right.
A lot of times when I work for people, they don't even know what, they're just, hey, guess what? You've got 2 days and we don't know what we're doing. Do a cool piece of art,
Yeah.
So
I never liked that as an illustrator, by the way.
No. Yeah.
I would always ask for layouts, and sometimes we don't have one, and you're kind of flying blind.
Yeah.
I would rather have been given a layout that say they want an illustration, and I know where the space is.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, they need a horizontal. I'm going to lay this out to tell a story horizontally. And if I didn't get that, so you always end up working in an 8.5 by 11 format if you don't, and then they try to squeeze it into something else. and it always is a mess.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you did hit a nail on the head there, which, and I said earlier, is I felt that I should acknowledge my weaknesses and my strengths. And that was one of my strengths, that I had already had over 2 decades of experience as a freelance illustrator. And that meant I had been in situations where art directors or editors had asked me to do something, and I would think, this is impossible. They're asking me to do something that can't be done.
Mm-hmm.
the typical joke about this is, okay, what we want is that scene from Gone with the Wind where all the dead bodies are in the Atlanta train station and Scarlett O'Hara is walking amongst them. And in the distance, in the far distance, one of these soldiers is not quite dead. And he sits up and you can see on his belt buckle is the name of his beloved. I said, wait. You want this panoramic scene with dozens and dozens and dozens of figures, and in the distance you want a close-up of a belt buckle.
Yeah.
Right. and you know, everybody in the business has gotten problems like that that either solved or failed to solve because it was insolvable. My one strength I felt as an art director was that I understood how artists worked, at least up to a point. And if an artist said to me, this can't be done, I could show him how to do it. Because you're right, it had already been thought out, at least to that level. The MAD process, and I don't think this is always the process with magazines, which is one reason why when my job as art director of MAD ended, it didn't occur to me at all to apply for a job as art director anywhere else, because I was still, as far as I was concerned, an illustrator who had had a job as an art director for 19 years.
Yeah.
But the MAD is very much most readers don't really have a clue how intense the central operation of the editorial and art department, the staff, is to putting that magazine together. I think a reader might have this vague notion that Desmond Devlin decides to write a movie parody and then sends it to Tom Richmond and says, when you're done, Tom, send it to MAD and they'll print it. But they don't realize is that Desmond was contacted by John Ficarra, who said, we've decided to do a parody of Terminator, and it has to be 6 pages. So we need 24 panels plus a splash page. You know, Desmond's done this long enough. He knows what he's doing. But then he sends a script in. Ficarra reads it and says, okay, you know, this gag isn't very good. You got to come up with a different gag. The ending is weak. You need to do a different ending. Maybe before he sends it back to Desmond, it'll make the rounds of the editorial department, and they rate all the gags. And sometimes there's disagreements, so the editorial department will get together and they'll fight over the gags they have disagreements on, and John will make the final decision, because he's the editor-in-chief, whether that gag stays or goes. But eventually that marked up script goes back to the writer, and he does all of the changes that are asked for, and it goes back then to Ficarra, who makes a final edit, and it comes to the art department. So now we get a script, and it's our job to lay it out. Now, I mentioned a movie parody. You know, movie parody has certain kinds of structural limitations. If you've ever seen one in MAD, they all, you know, have that splash page and then the panels and the balloons at the top. Other kind of articles may be more free form because they don't follow any other kind of format. So, and usually in those cases, I gave it to one of the designers because they were designers. I wasn't. But that's the next step, is to take the script and to lay it out. You know, back in the old days, before digital, the art director, Lenny Brenner, or before him, John Putnam, first thing they would do is they had to have the typeset. Now, it was the editor's job to copycast the type to make sure it would fit. And then the art department would send it to a type shop to get typeset. And then they cut the type out and they paste it onto a mechanical board. You know, and in the layout, not just willy-nilly, they would design that layout. And once that was approved, it would be sent to an artist. Now, once we got into the digital age, a lot of the copy casting fell in the art department because they give us a script. We'd see if it would fit. If not, we'd go back to the editorial department and they cut words out. But you're really right, Jason, that we had the whole thing set up long before it got to an artist. And very often, depending on the kind of article it was, I would actually do little doodles to show exactly what was going on, what the visual needed to be. Because there were a couple reasons that was done. Sometimes the editorial department had no idea how to visualize a gag, and I would need to show it to them to make sure they saw where it was going to. A lot of artists preferred to have those doodles because it saved them a lot of angst and a lot of time and a lot of trouble trying to guess what we wanted from them. Yeah. So depending on the article, I would do doodles. Once again, going back to the editor to make sure he was okay with what was going out. And, you know, that's one thing about my job as art director. I didn't have 100% final say on all matters related to art. I always wanted to make sure my editor approved what I was doing. He was my boss. And we had fights a lot of times. But, you know, eventually you get to be on the same page. I know what he likes. He knows what I like. And we can find an area of agreement. And that included who's the right artist for this job. Sometimes that was decided the moment the job came in, you know, oh, this is a Tom Bunk job. This is a Rick Tulka job. This is a Tom Richmond job. Sometimes you wouldn't know until you laid it out. And sometimes the laying out would kind of inform us who might do a good job with this. Sometimes there were fights. Sometimes we argue about that. Sometimes I'd argue with Ryan Flanders. He'd design an article and he'd want one artist. I say, I think this should be another artist. And John Ficarra would have to weigh in. So by the time it gets to an artist, it's all designed. The artist knows exactly where the art's going, where the words are, and very often already has a very rough sketch to base his or her art on.
Yeah.
And that means that as an artist, it's good and bad because it robs you of a certain amount of the creative process. On the other hand, two things. One is if you had a better idea, and I think this came up once or twice with you in some of the jobs you did, you present what you think would work better to us. And we either say, you know, you're right, or, you know, it's not a bad idea, but we still want it the way we asked for.
Yeah. I think with what's funny, like you say that is that happened with that Terminator piece. It was like a little thing where I was like, don't you think it'd be funny if there was a microphone hanging out from the bottom of her, you know, because her body's like halfway ripped apart.
Right.
And there's all these things, and you guys went with it. You thought that was a fun idea.
I was gonna say, that sounds like a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the other part of it, which is that it allows you as an artist to really concentrate on why we picked you in the first place. Your thinking ability to add to what we've already given you, and your skills as a drawer, as a painter, as a renderer, whatever. You know, that way you don't have to start out doing lots of sketches saying, what do they want from me? Yeah. You know, so, but then, you know, as you know, you send us sketches and you may have incorporated things that we didn't necessarily ask you for. And we have to decide, is this help the piece? Does it, does it hurt the piece, or is it neutral? And then we give it back to you. Usually it's very rare that we ever sent back a finished piece for changes because of this process where we know to some extent what we're going to get long before we get it, because we know what the artist is capable of. We've given him very strong framework within which to work, and he's shown us progress along the way.
Yeah.
So
Another thing I really loved whenever I worked with you guys was you're like the only client that paid really fast. Like I remember just always being like, this is crazy. Like I just did this. Like, cause you know how it is. Sometimes you wait months like
I'm
to get
still waiting for payment from freelance jobs from 1985.
Oh my God. I don't doubt that.
Well, that was actually, it was even more like that when I started, when Bill Gaines was still alive. When Gaines was alive, he ran Mad like a 1950s mom and pop comic book shop. And assuming that you lived in New York, you could go right to the office with your final art, deliver it, and then he'd write you a check right then and there.
That's awesome.
And as often as not, you leave not only with the check, but with your next job.
Yeah.
Now, after Gaines, and he had one of those old-fashioned check writing machines, pa-chung, pa-chung, pa-chung.
That's awesome.
After Gaines died and DC took over, fortunately, DC also had a good policy. And I don't know if we needed to tweak them at all, because I wasn't on staff at that time. But we always generated the purchase orders immediately. Actually, the purchase orders were generated when the job was handed off to the artist. So we were ready with the check usually before you even finished the art.
Yeah.
So we could send it out right away.
I always appreciate that.
Yeah, all the artists do. Yeah. And that is also part of our thinking, that we want the artist to feel that they're part of us. Gaines had a lot of tricks up his sleeve how to do that. He actually gave freelancers bonuses. At the Christmas party, he would hand out checks. And there was this bizarre formula that he had about how many pages they had done over the year and blah, 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 blah. But also, and this is one of the smartest moves, and people are aware of the mad trips, that beginning in 1959, he would take all the freelancers, at least those that had done a certain amount of work in the year previously, on a trip somewhere. And it started on a trip to Haiti. There were several years they went to different locations in the Caribbean. Then it expanded. And over the years, they went on safari to Africa. They went to Russia. They went to Hong Kong. They went to Mexico. Even after I became involved, my first trip in 1987 was to Switzerland and then to Paris. And that's when I went on that trip, that's when I really felt like a part of MAD, like one of the usual gang of idiots, because here I was on a trip, not necessarily meeting for the first time these guys, but the first time I spent any real time with Jack Davis and Al Jaffe and Stan Hart and Dick DiBartolo and George Woodbridge and Paul Peter Porges. And I had expected that they were going to treat me like the new kid and, make me eat dinner over at my own table. But they embraced me as one of their own. And I felt like one of them. And so that kind of family atmosphere, and clearly, by the way, Bill's whole point in taking everyone on a trip was to do that. Because while most readers of MAD had this image that all the MAD writers and artists sat at desks in one big room shooting spitballs at each other in between writing scripts and drawing pages. The fact is, everybody was a freelancer working out of their studios. Many of them were not in New York. Sergio was in California, and Martin was in Florida, and who knows? And by the time I was involved, we had artists in France, in Australia, in all over the country. So, these trips were like summer camp.
Yeah, that's
Get together
awesome.
for a week or two, and get to know each other and feel like a family, with Bill Gaines as the big daddy at the top of the rung. And after Gaines died, it was a little trickier to do that, because we not only didn't have Gaines as the figurehead anymore, but we also no longer had trips to take anybody on. So there were other ways that we had to make people feel like we loved and respected and wanted them as part of us.
Yeah.
And, I'm going to take some of the things you said as a confirmation that we achieved those goals.
Yeah. No, I mean, I, it was always, like I said, there's like, I still I'm very proud of work that I've done. I've done like time covers and stuff that I'm still like, I can't believe I've gotten to do that. But like, it always comes back to like the Mad thing was just one of those things where it's like, that little kid that has like these dreams of, this is what I want to do. And then to achieve those things, like one thing, I know the offices no longer exist. I don't know what happened to all the things in there, but one of my highlights was when I got to take my grandma into the Mad offices, and you had me sign the board, the Usual Gang of Idiots board, and I did a little drawing, and I'm looking at all these names of just my art heroes that I grew up with, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like if it was like such a cool moment.
Yeah.
And I don't know whatever happened to that board or anything, but that was like a huge deal. Like I remember just like leaving with my grandma, and I'm like, that was awesome.
They shipped the board to Burbank, and
really?
They did install it up in the offices, the Mad offices there in Burbank, California. By the time they did, there wasn't much room for anyone else to add to it. It was pretty covered, that board.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there are a few names that never made it on, either because people had passed away. I don't think Woodbridge got to sign the board, or I don't know, Porges might have. But Drucker never signed the board because Drucker never came to the offices. In the 19 years that I was art director at Mad, Mort Drucker came to the Mad offices one time. Because he didn't need to. He lived out in Long Island. He did his work. He FedExed it to us. He didn't like to have to travel. He didn't like the city.
I don't blame him.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Hey, I have a question from a fan for you.
Okay.
Questions from fans.
So this is from Dean Canop. And Dean was supposed to send an audio. I like to do questions from fans with audio because it's more interesting hearing their voice. So I'll try to read it. This is how I imagine Dean sounds like. 'Cause this is what happens when you don't send audio. Then I have to do this. So, hey, I'm a big fan of Sam since I was in the grade school. I have a story and a question, so I will start with my question. How do you create emotions in your caricatures in the 80s without the access to the internet? For reference, you made a plethora of caricatures look like they were angry and bemused and snarky from all the same persona. Did you have photo access to all the emotions? That's his question.
That's not a bad question. Dean.
Yeah.
Well, you're right. It was a lot trickier getting reference back in the pre-digital era. Mad actually made it a point to amass reference for their artists. Although I did my own. I mentioned earlier, enormously infatuated with magazines to begin with. So I would just collect piles and piles of magazines, not just ones I bought at the newsstand, but I'd go to the basement of our building and someone would have discarded a magazine. I would bring it up, and I had piles of magazines, and then I would be going through them for reference. A lot of times just generally. So I'd have boxes full of torn out pages from magazines and newspapers, but then I would also organize them. And when I closed down my studio within the last year or two, I think I had 10 filing cabinets full of clippings, the artist's morgue.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned to you earlier, Jason, back in the day, I might have already a file folder this thick of a given actor or actress. So obviously you wanted the most recent ones. You wanted ones that were specific to whatever movie you were parodying, but the actor was still the actor. So you could use other photos to see what does his nose look like, where are his eyes. So, and it was, as I mentioned, also very important to get from different angles. And Dean hit the nail on the head there too, with different expressions. Now, here's where the kind of trick comes out. I didn't want to base the emotions strictly on the reference, because then you're kind of limited to whatever you've caught on camera, whatever reference you could get. So I would always do the kind of doodles I talked about that I did as art director as the artist too. When I would get a job, and it could have been just a single illustration, it could have been a 6-page movie parody, I would do thumbnails, let's call them thumbnails.
Yeah.
In which I'm trying to establish the composition, the action, the story, and the mood, the emotions. Mm-hmm. So if I have a certain panel and this guy needs to be screaming angrily, well, I might not have reference for that. But on the other hand, I've got a lot of reference showing what that angle is going to look like. And I usually would do sketches preliminary to doing the job in order to just get a feel for the person's structure.
Yeah.
So by the time I did that drawing, I guess the best way I could fake it.
Yeah.
So a lot of those would not be strictly based on any given photo. They would be based on my understanding of what that person really looks like and my conjecture of what that person would look like if he or she were expressing that particular emotion. So.
Yeah, no, that's that kind of thing gets, even now we have like the access we have to internet. Like when I have to do pieces, there's a lot of times, like I just did a cover yesterday where I had to paint a politician where they wanted him from a specific angle and they wanted him smiling with his head back, but they don't want him smiling with his mouth open. They want it like a closed smile. And there's no references. I couldn't find any references of this guy with that kind of expression. I found plenty of him smiling or laughing with his mouth open. So what I have to do is just close that mouth and just rely on my knowledge of anatomy and to make it look as, but the difference is with something like that, I'm painting it very realistic.
Right.
So it's a little bit trickier to kind of pull off.
Absolutely.
And so that the mouth is probably not 100% exactly what it would look like, but it's enough that no one's going to know. It's a caricature. It's not like a realistic portrait, so you can kind of get away with it a little bit.
Yeah, but you're right. The difference between a highly detailed painting that you might do and a much more cartoony pen and ink approach that I might do, I have much more flexibility, I think.
Yeah.
Because this is, the Jack Davis famously or notoriously, when he would do a movie parody, he would make sure he got the likeness really well on the splash, on the opening page of the story. And it was clear that he hardly worked on it at all the rest of the story.
if you know who it's supposed to be.
Well, that's exactly the case.
Yeah.
You know, if it was Indiana Jones, because he did do Raiders of the Lost Ark. Well, he'd get a good Harrison Ford likeness on the first page. But as long as he had a guy with a fedora in the other pages, you knew who it was supposed to be. And his hallmark was a funny drawing.
Mm-hmm.
I think he realized that was more important than making sure that the scar on Harrison Ford's chin was in the right spot.
Yeah.
You know, the question I wanted to put to you, if I may, is why was your client so specific about what they wanted? Head back, smile, but closed mouth.
Well, it was a piece I did of the governor of Florida sitting on a beach, and they already have like the composition laid out of where they want him, how they want him on the cover. So they want him sitting in a chair at a specific angle. So it's like I have to draw the chair turned a certain way. He's set, you know. So that was why it was very specific about, you know, and they didn't want to show him smiling with teeth. And it actually helped me because I basically did it in a day and a half. And the fact that he's got sunglasses on and no teeth saved me quite a bit of time. And I didn't have to paint the eyes or the teeth. You have to
paint all those teeth.
No, so quickly. But I mean, that happens when I do realistic type stuff as well. Like when I did the cover for Time Person of the Year this year with Biden and Harris,
right.
They the references they sent me of Biden, every one of the pictures, he's got his mouth open, he's talking, and they wanted his mouth closed. So it's a little bit different when you're trying to paint something very realistic, like realistic portraits.
Sure.
That's just basically there's a lot of reference and also just experience of painting people. But I mean, I'm not having to make him do a crazy expression. That would be way, and I've had to do that.
Yeah, sure.
Like even with that Katie Couric piece, the Terminator one I did, I remember the references. You guys sent me specific references of her, but you didn't really want the expression. You wanted the angle. It was like one of those things because her head had to fit the same angle as the thing. But I remember like that was the hardest part about that piece was just getting that expression just right. So it's because a lot of it had to be made up because I didn't have references of her from that angle with I only had expressions, I think, straight on of the kind of expression. So that was a really tricky thing to pull off. But that's I mean, I think like when it comes to caricature, that's the one thing that's different because you do have a little bit more freedom to push it. So like that's why I like you were talking about before, like some of those artists that like even like Richard Williams, who's like a very serious artist, very painter, like that guy can really paint, but when you see his work, the image might be like deadpan, but that's why it's funny because he's able to pull it off in that way. It's not about drawing something or painting something funny. It's the story. It's the idea that's funny, that it gets pulled off.
Well, but by the way, Richard, and this is not necessarily true of every painter, Richard is a fantastic drawer.
Yeah.
I loved getting his sketches because they were loose and they were funny and they were well drawn. And then he would do the paintings and he painted big. Sometimes he would send us a painting in a crate and it was about 4 feet high by 3 feet wide. Gigantic. But and I think you really pointed out that experience plays a big part. Yeah. If you've done this sort of thing a lot, well, you can quote fake a certain expression from a certain angle without the reference, because not only do you understand the physiognomy, the structure, but you've done it enough that you know what it's supposed to look like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you can't, that's the thing that's frustrating too, is like you you know what it's supposed to look like, but it's not right. And there's something,
Yeah.
and that could be that can be such a hard thing sometimes where there's something not right. And that's when I'm like usually flipping an image, like sitting the mirror version of it, flipping it upside down, sending it to a friend of mine. What is wrong with this thing? What, it's like there's something that's happened before, and you just do a little tweak. You're like, oh my gosh, that was it. I just needed that little mark by the mouth, and now I got it.
Yeah.
But anyways, speaking of getting things right, I have some fan art of people did some drawings of you.
Oh boy.
So you can see if how they did here. You can art direct them. That'd be awesome. So let me share my screen with you. Tell me if you see this.
That's very funny. I like that. I do. I really do. What I like about that, first of all, is who's his name?
This is Dan McConnell.
Oh, Dan McConnell. I know Dan.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Dan really got me, I think. One of the things I noticed, I do workshops at Gilda's Club in New York. Gilda's Club, which was started by Gene Wilder after his wife Gilda Radner passed away, and Gilda's Club is for the benefit of cancer survivors and children of cancer patients, and through the Theater Within, which is an organization that my fellow mad guy Joe Raiola is executive director of. I do workshops at Gilda's Club, and they're caricature workshops, and I almost always start out having them draw me. And one of the first things I always point out is when they draw me somehow with dark hair and dark beard. And I say, well, that's a great drawing of me from 25 years ago. So the first thing that Dan got is the old me. And the second is I like that quizzical, humorous expression that he got. Obviously, though, Wallaby, my pup there, didn't like it. He left.
You can't please them all.
Nice job, Dan. By the way, I'm sure you're aware, Jason, Dan McConnell's not just any fan. He's a professional. He's been in Mad.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that. That's awesome. Yeah. That's very cool. Awesome work, Dan. This I love this. This is by Jacques Lemonnier.
Well, it's a distinctly French take. I take it. Yeah. Nicely rendered. I like the what is that? It looks like Conti crayon.
Yeah, I think it's just a graphite. He does a lot of graphite, but I think he said he did the beard digitally, like added the white.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, very nice drawing technique.
Both he and Dan got in this one too. These very hypnotic eyes.
This is by Dominic Zeilinger. This is actually I think this is a parody of your cover. I just realized that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. The JR cover.
Yeah.
I didn't recognize it either. That's very clever.
Did you say that was your first cover?
My first cover for Mad. Yeah.
Oh, so that was in 80?
The June 1981 issue.
Oh,
although
wow.
To give you an idea about lead time is that it was commissioned the day before or the day after Thanksgiving, and I delivered it on December 15th, 1980.
Wow.
So 40 years ago.
And that was watercolor, that one?
It was pen and ink and Dr. Martin's dyes, which is the kind of watercolor. Synchromatic watercolor.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Ooh.
Here we go. This is by Patrick Limegruber.
Looks like I'm trying to seduce myself.
Yeah. That's true. Hello.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hey, how are you?
I was taken from a slightly older picture because my hair is still a little on the darker gray side as opposed to almost fully white.
Yeah. The silver fox.
Yeah.
Here you go. This is by Walid Shihab.
Interesting enough, makes me look a little like Nick Meglin.
Oh, that's true. Yeah,
If you knew Nick or know Nick.
I know the images. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is kind of cool. The interesting, kind of squarish, rectangular brushstrokes.
Yeah. I assume this is digital. It's
Yeah, yeah,
but it's very it's interestingly I do like the hard solid areas of tone.
yeah. It's pretty bold.
Yeah,
That's cool. And this is funny.
That is the way I looked whenever I'd be drawing Alfred. I actually I never particularly enjoyed drawing Alfred. Alfred E. Newman, Mad's cover boy, because I had to do it a lot as art director to do doodles and comps and sketches to share with the editorial department. And Alfred has to be done very, very, very specifically. In fact, I would always tell Mad's artists, particularly cover artists, don't try to do a caricature of Alfred because, believe it or not, he doesn't exist. He's not a real person. Trace the Norman Mingo original and then render it in your fashion, in your style.
Yeah, that's good. Oh, this is by Addison Stacy, by the way.
Hello, Addison.
Yeah, my cover for Mad was weird because, basically I did his face, I did Alfred Newman's face, but as a uvula. And then it's a zoomed in close up of his face with his mouth wide open, and we've never seen his mouth wide open.
Right.
So that was weird to try to create that, but still look like Alfred E. Newman. And then, and then I based my uvula off of Mingo and Fredrickson's, like just to make sure I got the proportions just right. Yeah.
Fredrickson, both Fredrickson and Mingo have done Alfred's uvula.
Yeah.
Wow.
No. Yeah, and it's kind of funny when I did that, they were like, "What the uvula doesn't hang down in the center of a mouth. It's like all the way in the back of the throat, but the way that they wanted it was like it's like hanging down in the middle. It was kind of a weird thing to pull off.
Yeah.
But
the big challenge.
Yeah, it was. I know. I was like, my first cover for Mad, and this is the one I got to do. I gotta paint a giant Alfred face close up that no one's ever seen before.
I had a much easier challenge in my first cover. Now, I've been meaning to mention that first of all, congratulations on your Time Person of the Year cover.
Oh, thank you.
And obviously not your first time cover by a long shot, which means that you have achieved multiple times one of my original goals as an illustrator that I never achieved, which was to do a Time cover. Back when I started out, Jack Davis was doing lots of Time covers for like approximately one a month.
Wow.
Yeah, because they could call him in on a moment's notice, and he could have a sketch for them by the time he reached the offices, because he'd do it on the train in from Westchester, and then he would paint the finish in the offices.
Oh my gosh.
So, but
that is crazy.
And there was a changeover, and Walter Bernard became art director, I think 1977 or 78, and the whole style changed, and you never saw Davis again on the cover of Time, and you didn't see that kind of caricature on Time again either.
Yeah. Huh.
What a handsome man.
This one's really nicely done. This is by Christine Verratti.
Well, Christine, you my kudos. You really, it's beautifully done. Very beautifully rendered. I'm falling in love with myself.
Very suave. Now, nice
I do. I look very suave.
Yeah, I like the use of color in this as well.
Yeah,
really cool.
Yeah, very nicely done.
All right.
Jesus.
So
well, who is this by?
This is by Juan Gastelum.
With the utmost artistic respect, Juan.
Yeah.
Well, although Juan broke one of the cardinal rules.
Yep. I knew you were going to say this. I was waiting for this.
Yes. We never, ever, well, it's not entirely true. There are a couple of examples I could point out where we did, but the general rule was we never would draw Alfred in anything but a front view.
Yep.
And that's part of what I said earlier is Alfred is not a real person. He's basically a kind of logo type. And he really only exists from a front view and a back view, both of them painted originally by Norman Mingo.
Mm-hmm.
And Juan kind of points out one of the reasons why it's very difficult to really capture Alfred by trying to turn him into a 3/4 view. But he did a pretty good job, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah, he got it pretty. I mean, it's really hard to do that with, because there's a lot you have to make up there. I mean, you guys, I remember seeing, I think maybe at the office when I was there, I thought you had like in your office, I thought you had like a sculpt of him, like a 3D sculpt.
Well, there definitely have existed. In my office, I had an Alfred Oscar that Liz Lomax sculpted.
Oh, okay.
And then we did have on the wall somewhere a bas relief, a little plaque, and that was at least had some dimension to it. I've known a number of people who have done sculptures of Alfred. Bill Nelson, great illustrator, sent me a photo one time of a sculpture he had done of Alfred. And Tony Cipriano, who was a student of mine at SVA 35 years ago, and went on to a long career as a sculptor and has worked at Disney and I believe at Universal, and has done sculptures for DC and lots of others. He did a marvelous sculpture of Alfred E. Newman. And I know he did a YouTube video of him sculpting it. And that's worth anybody looking up to see. Tony Cipriano, Cipriano.
Huh. Tony Cipriano. Did you see Sebastian Kruger actually painted an Alfred like a couple months ago? An Alfred E. Newman.
They used it in the interior of the magazine, maybe?
No, he did it. It was like a private commission, I believe.
I may have seen it, I may not have.
It's really interesting because it's a weird angle. It's not the front view. It's like this. It's like a side view of him.
I'll have to see.
It's pretty good. It's
anybody could do it. Would be Kruger.
Yeah. And I think he did that on purpose because I think he knows that it's never really seen from that view.
Yeah,
it's weird. When you see it, you're like, that's strange. But he pulled it off really well.
I think that Richard Williams once did a cover with a slightly 3/4 view of Alfred. But I would venture to guess we never did it at all in the 19 years that I art directed it. That we just, by that time, before I had even set foot in the offices, the decision had been made: Alfred front view only.
Yeah, I love it. I love how serious it is. That's what's great. Like that's one thing I've always loved about Mad was that even though it's goofy and there's like fart jokes and all that kind of stuff, the people creating it are serious.
We definitely took it very seriously. I used to tell people about how the editorial department would get into raging battles when working on an article over a comma. They'd be fighting whether that comma needed to be in there or not, screaming at each other. So yeah, we did take it serious. And once again, as I said earlier, people I don't think realize how intense the office activity was, that because the stars of the magazine have always been the contributors, the writers and the artist and the cartoonist. But the magazine itself as an entity was entrusted to the care of that small group of people in the office. And we all did take our jobs very seriously, no question.
Yeah. No, that's what's awesome about it. It's funny when you were talking about Jack Davis with the time covers. It was funny because that was always my dream as well, but I never thought of it. I never thought of, I would be doing like realistic type portrait work. That just wasn't what my goal was when I started into the work of the world of illustration, I should say. And I never saw caricature hardly ever on the cover of Time magazine, except for like I saw CF Payne did one or two. I remember Roberto Prada did Bush for Person of the Year, but it wasn't a caricature; it's very realistic.
Right. Yeah.
But there was a couple, but it was like years and years and years ago, and it was always something I thought it would be just amazing to be able to. And it's funny again, I had done realistic covers for Time, but 2 years ago they asked me to do. I did a cover for Time magazine, and it was like I remember like it was like a double take, huh?
Pelosi and the
Yeah,
catapult, right?
yeah. And it was interesting because I had a completely different approach. Well, like when he first asked me to do it, I was like, now did you say caricature? Like I get to draw a caricature of Trump and Pelosi on the cover of Time, and I took that as, ooh, they want to like. This is Trump's gonna tweet about this. Like this is like, and so my first sketches were like, I'm going to just have some fun with this one, but they were like, no. We want it very tame. And then eventually, they came up with the idea of showing Trump from behind, make him look like a little boy on a ledge, and kind of show him from behind. And so, and then you see Pelosi kind of in the distance. So it was a little bit of a different approach than how I would have normally drawn either of those people, but that was really cool that I'm like, I did a caricature cover for Time. Like that was one of those things where, I did the Pope for Time, but that one is more exciting for me.
I can understand that. Yeah, once upon a time, they actually featured a fair number of caricatured covers.
Yeah.
One I remember from the 60s were paper mache sculptures of the Beatles by Gerald Scarfe.
Wow.
Those are really, really broad caricatures. And as I said, Davis did a lot of covers. And I think certain, yes, hi, Jason. That's my old dog barking. You coming over, Jay? No, he wants a cookie. In times of political turmoil, very often that's when political satire comes to the forefront. Mm-hmm. And so it was during the Nixon era that with the Watergate period that Davis did a lot of covers. Drucker did a few time covers in that time as well. So I think that as time happened, sometimes we get that opportunity. And as I said, it was around 77 or so after Watergate that Time got a new art director and they went in a different direction. So you didn't see that kind of caricature again.
Yeah. That's why I was very shocked when it came up.
The Pope was your first cover for Time, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, technically. Yeah.
You did an international one before that?
No, I did a Snowden. I painted a Snowden for Time. It was supposed to be the cover, but they kind of tricked me a little bit because I didn't realize I was painting Person of the Year, and they didn't know who the Person of the Year was going to be yet. So I painted Snowden, and they loved it, and they said, "Hey, would you like to do another cover for us?" So I thought I was doing 2 covers for Time magazine, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, "This is insane! What is this going to be like? Snowden cover is going to come out, and then a few weeks later that this other one's going to come out. Like this is like what's happening?" But I didn't realize that they were both up for the Person of the Year, and then so the Pope was the official first one that I got published.
I got you.
And
it's no secured though, right?
Yeah, it was inside. It was like inside.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Which is nice because you know, that was like a crazy experience, you know, like, it's like, wow, this is nuts.
You know,
That was one of those bucket lists, you know.
once upon a time, Time would commission, not just for Person of the Year, but regular issues, several covers, because whatever was the breaking story when they went to press. And that's once again why Davis did so many covers back in the mid 70s, was because there's a lot of breaking news and they had to get something done quickly. Yeah. And he was capable of doing it.
So first of all, I want to say thank you to everybody that sent in the drawings of Sam. That was awesome.
Thank you all.
But I wanted to ask you, like, before we wrap this bad boy up, is what have you been keeping yourself busy with lately, art wise and stuff? You've been
it was a little odd for me to be retired from MAD. It was not a voluntary retirement. The people at Warner and DC Comics decided that MAD had to move out to the West Coast. Essentially, none of us on the staff had any interest in moving to California. The only one who did was Bern Mendoza, we had just hired essentially a few months earlier. And we said, Bern, you're 26 years old. Take the offer, move to California, have an adventure. Yeah. And he's one of the few people actually involved in still putting MAD together now. The rest of us were laid off, retired. And my original thought, Jason, was to go back to being a freelance illustrator. As I said earlier, it didn't even occur to me to continue being an art director, because I didn't see myself as an art director, only as art director of MAD. Yeah. But I also found out that the business had changed a lot in the 20 years I'd been away from doing it full time. And, you know, I had been primarily a magazine illustrator, and there were lots and lots and lots of magazines back in the 80s and 90s. Not so many now. Yeah. And it would have been much more difficult for me to get back into it as a full-time career. So basically, I accepted the fact that I was retired. But I've been lucky enough that I've gotten interesting assignments out of the blue. I've done a couple of jobs for MAD, including a cover for the All Jaffe issue. Oh, yeah. Which was nice to be able to collaborate with Al Jaffe, who, by the way, is going to be 100 years old on March 13th. And I'm hoping to be able to do something regarding that shortly. So maybe that's awesome. Stay tuned to my social media, because I post things on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. So when I'm ready to announce it, which hopefully will be in the next couple weeks, we'll be able to celebrate Al's birthday somehow. Yeah, that's awesome. I also, there was a regular gig I've done sort of over 30 years, an anniversary cover for Hits magazine, which is a music industry magazine published out of LA. And it was an Alfred cover of all things. An interesting job I got contacted by the producer, the executive producer of Blue Bloods, the cop show on CBS, the one with Tom Selleck. And the producer was, he's chagrined, let's put it that way, that even though the show had been on for 10 years, MAD had never done a parody of it. So he commissioned his own. Oh, that's funny. He put together a parody of MAD. I said, well, okay. It'll take a few months. He said, we need it by the middle of March. I said, well, that'll be a little trickier because this was late January. And it takes a lot more time to do than a month and a half, 2 months. But I said, I think we can do it. I contacted Desmond Devlin, who had written many of our parodies. And he wrote it. I had John Ficarra edit it. I did all the design and illustration, although I got Jim Campbell to do the coloring because I needed somebody to help with the time management. I even got Sergio Aragonis to do marginal cartoons for it. Oh, that's great. And then in the middle of March, I got a call from the producer. He said, we don't need it quite so quickly because we had to send everybody home.
Oh yeah.
pandemic, which was fine for me because it gave me actually a few more months to finish the art without rushing it. And instead of giving it as a 10th anniversary present to the cast and crew, they welcomed them back when they started up production on the 11th season in the summer. So I was happy. It was a fun project to do.
Yeah.
And I got a little side benefit of it. Last week's episode of Blue Bloods, Tom Selleck, who's the police commissioner of New York, calls in his staff. He says, well, what business do we have to attend to? And the first thing they say is, there's a disciplinary action on Officer Viviano.
That's pretty awesome.
So it wasn't Sam Viviano, because the producer said it didn't clear because I'm, as he put it, too darn famous. So it was Officer Brian Viviano.
Officer Brian. That's pretty funny.
Other than that, a lot of it's been the kind of thing, and I'm sure you kind of get these calls, and I'm not too busy to take them, where somebody finds me and says, hey, could you do a caricature of my kids? Can you do a caricature of me and my fiance? Yeah. And sometimes it's just interesting stuff. I got an email from a guy who is you know what? I'm not going to talk about this one because this is going to be public. The person in question can't find out before he receives it. Yeah. So I won't talk about that.
Mum's the word.
Yeah. But what happens is if you say, it's an interesting person, and I'm going to have fun doing the job, and I'm enjoying the interaction with the person commissioning it. That's one of the nice things about not having to worry about making a living at it, where, you have to worry where the next meal's coming in. Fortunately, my wife is still working and she's a doctor. So
smart,
and that added to the huge Social Security payment I get, and the small pension I get from MAD. We're on easy street. Yeah. So, but I still like to draw. And when I was retired, one of the things I rediscovered was enjoying just sketching, just for my own enjoyment.
Mm-hmm.
And I would take a photograph that I'd torn out of a magazine or something, and I just draw it just to keep the muscles going. And it was a lot of fun. And I mentioned this before, so I'll plug myself again. I'd signed up for all the different social media platforms, mostly because everyone said I should. People said, oh, you should be on Instagram. Yeah. So I signed up on Instagram, but I had no interest in posting. But then, and you asked me about this earlier, my friend Leonardo Rodriguez, who is also a MAD artist and real nice guy and a terrific artist himself, Venezuelan, now living in Spain, asked if I would do something like what we're doing right now. He asked if he could interview me online. And I said, sure, why not? So he's interviewing me, and almost in real time, I see so-and-so is following you on Instagram. So-and-so is now following you on Instagram. Suddenly I have all these followers on Instagram, and there's nothing for them to follow. Nothing.
You didn't have anything posted.
Yeah. So I said, okay. You know what? Maybe it's time. So this is what I ended up doing. It was the decision of how I was going to do it. Every day, Monday through Friday, I put up one piece. Now, this may be a piece that a sketch I did last week. It may be something I did for MAD 20 years ago. It may be something I did for Scholastic magazines 40 years ago. I put it up, and if there's a story behind the piece, I'll tell the story. So sometimes it's a short paragraph. Sometimes I go on and on and on until when Instagram says you've gone past your word limit.
Yeah.
And sometimes I put up stuff my dad did when he was a teenager, because I felt it's worth people seeing that. Yeah. That's part of my background, part of my development, and it's been a little fun. Sometimes I get interesting comments. I don't have a huge following. It's a few hundred, I think, and that's fine. I don't need to be, having a following of millions, because I'd have a hard time keeping up with it. But it's been interesting. I don't know how long I'll do it, but if anybody's interested, as I said, I'm on Instagram and Facebook. On Facebook, it's Sam Viviano Illustrator. I don't accept friend requests from people I don't know.
Yeah.
You have to be someone I actually know in real life for me to say, okay, you're a friend. But I'm also on LinkedIn, because I figure that's kind of a business oriented thing.
I'm on that too, but I don't think I've ever used it. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, I didn't either.
I get contacted by people sometimes, but
yeah, and well, that's how the guy from Blue Bloods found me.
Yeah.
So I figured, okay, I should post to LinkedIn. On Instagram, I think I'm Sam Viviano Illustrator as well. So I think if you did a search for Sam Viviano, if that popped up, it would be me.
You'll find it. Everyone will find it.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, if you're interested, it's like, as somebody put it, it's kind of like a fragmented trip down memory lane.
Yeah, I think it's cool. Like for me, like I enjoy the Instagram more than anything else, just because it's, it's basically just showing images and work. I try to keep it all about my work. It's a cool way to like meet a bunch of other artists as well, because there's so many artists on Instagram, and there's so, like, every time I go on there, I see something else and some other artist that I never heard of before. So it's kind of cool. But yeah, I don't use, there's that TikTok, there's all these different things people are using, and it's just, it's too much. It's too many.
I don't dance well enough for TikTok.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. You mentioned something. It's all about the artwork. As far as I'm concerned, it's just about the art and the career.
Yeah.
I did, one of the things I decided, this is not about my personal life. Now, I did post a drawing I did of myself and my wife before we got married. But I'm not interested in discussing politics with people. There's too much of that, I think, on social media, and it becomes mudslinging on both sides. I don't enjoy reading it, so I don't see any reason to post it.
Yeah. No, it gets nasty. I'm tired of it myself.
Yeah.
But anyways, man, I want to just say thank you again so much for taking the time to do this. It was so cool just to hear, like, I always wanted to know a little bit more about like the behind the scenes, a little bit of, from your perspective of how the magazine came together and everything else, but also just appreciate you sharing stuff about your own art and how you kind of developed that. I mean, like I said, this is really cool. It's been, full circle for me. I mean, I've gotten to meet so many artists that were like heroes of mine, that are still heroes of mine, that I can now call friends, and it's an amazing thing, for me. And like, just again, like I said, like this caricature book, I've had this since I was a kid, and it's just amazing. Never thought I would go where, you don't know as an artist, like for me anyways, I didn't really have much of a plan, except for I just wanted to draw. And then when doors opened, I went through them. And then when I started to realize, I need to get a job one day, then I started focusing a little bit more on like where I wanted to go with it. But there's always these like seeds of where everything started. And like, it's just so interesting how small the world seems sometimes. Like even back like early when I first started discovering caricature, I grew up in North Wisconsin, and my parents would go to the Mall of America in Minneapolis, and they would drop me off at the caricature booth, because I'd want to sit there and just watch this guy draw whoever it was for hours. Turns out one of them was Tom Richmond, and it was like his business. And like, and then years later, I'm connected with him through the caricature convention, all this kind of stuff. And of course it's mad, but it's just interesting how these things all kind of come together. I feel like, just connected with so many different artists in so many different ways. So I really appreciate you coming on and just like sharing what you did. It was pretty awesome. And again, thank you for hiring me on in years like in 2008. That was a big deal for me, and it really means a lot. So I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the invitation, and I've had a blast.
But yeah, seriously, thank you so much, and thank you everybody for hanging out and checking this out. Next week, Brad Garrett's going to be on. Awesome.
He's
comedian.
much taller than I am.
Yeah, 6'8", I think.
No, he's
Yeah, it's crazy, but he's going to be on. That's going to be cool to hear about his stuff. So, as always, thank you everyone for your support, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
You want answers? And the truth shall set you free. I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.